Peace and joy. I trust you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been a very happy day. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So these past few nights, we've met these various characters and treated mainly with the whole problem of dukkha, suffering, pleasure, all that sort of stuff. So I thought we would dig a little deeper and go to the first discourse in the book. It's called The Root of All Things. And it's one of the most difficult of discourses. And Bhikkhu Bodhi has written a book on it, The Discourse on the Root of Existence, he's called it, which after this talk, or well, I think it'll take 2 nights, you can take the study further. So this is really just an introduction to it, and there are so many things that are spoken of in this discourse that it really is quite difficult to keep it all together. So the first thing is to just see what it is that we're talking about. So again, the Blessed One is at Ukata. So this is again in the northern country of Kosala, just beneath the Himalayas, it seems. And he's at the Subhaga Grove, at the root of the royal sala tree. That's a particular tree. And there's a group of monks and nuns and other people around. And he says, listen, attend closely to what I shall say. So now, this is the first paragraph, and this paragraph is repeated with different subjects all the way through the discourse, or at least most of the discourse. An untaught ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their dharma, who has no regard for true men, is an unskilled and undisciplined in their dharma, perceives earth as earth. Having perceived earth as earth, he conceives himself as earth. He conceives himself in earth. He conceives himself apart from earth, and he conceives earth to be mine. And he delights in earth. Why is that? Because he's not fully understood it, I say. Okay. So now this earth is the earth element, so it's part of our body. So remember, when the Buddha is talking, he makes it plain. If he's talking about the world out there, he's talking about the world that we are personally experiencing, our own inner subjective phenomenal world. And we've been through these basic concepts about the earth, the solidity of our body, the air, the movement, the water, the elasticity, and the fire, the warmth or cold. So that's how this opens. Now, the first thing is to understand what he means by perception being perverted. So these are called the perversions of perception, the sanya vipalasa, the perversions of perception. So the first one is that whenever we talk about ourselves or part of our bodies, or even when we see something outside the body, from our perspective, we see what is impermanent as permanent. Now, that doesn't strike true. I mean, we know that all things change, but here, impermanent, of course, is the idea of it being moment to moment, whereas for us, everything flows. So even when we, go to bed at night, we don't presume that tomorrow we'll be dead. There's a sort of presumption that life will carry on. We perceive our lives as continuing, you see, and that's the perversion. We don't see it as it really is, which is, of course, arising and passing away very momentarily. And we don't, and we, what is painful, we see as pleasurable. And this is always referring to this indulgence, right? Not to pleasure itself, but how we relate to it. That's the perversion. And as we know, indulgence, attachment, dependency brings sorrow in its wake. Yeah, the grief of loss, anxiety that you might lose it, frustration when you don't get it, and so on. And of course, there's what is not self, we perceive as self. So this is how we see ourselves, how we experience ourselves as a person, as one integral, total person. Whereas we know we're made up of all sorts of stuff. And finally, the foul as beautiful. So here you've got to be careful. We're not talking about beauty as an aesthetic appreciation, but more the body itself. That, remember, beauty is only skin deep. So if you take the skin off somebody, it isn't particularly nice. So these are the four perversions that we have. Now, when we perceive something, this is the moment when we have that first image, the first photocopy in the mind. And it's from that first photocopy that other photocopies are added. And this is the process of a perception slowly building up into a concept. Now, if you take just a very simple thing like an orange, the first time we saw an orange, we would have perceived it as an object, would have tasted it, etc., etc. But the more we ate oranges, the more we found out about oranges, we found they come in all sorts of sizes, in all sorts of sweetness and bitterness, and then we have this grand concept of an orange. So that word, which is only a sound, of course, other languages have different words for an orange. That's only a sound, but for us, it holds our experience of oranges, which includes, of course, marmalade, without which very difficult to live. Okay, so when we're conceiving, here there are three things involved which distort the process of conception. First of all, there's the wrong view, the wrong understanding, which is included in these perversions that we've talked about. The perversion of perception, right? It's all there, as it were, within that concept. Then, of course, there's the emotional commitment to it. If you think about politics, if you think about religion, people get very attached to their concepts about what life is about, what politics should be about, etc., etc. That attachment is a real heart commitment, and of course, people will die for their beliefs. And then there's mana, which is the conceit. So this conceit is always three-part. I am better than the rest, everybody else. I'm worse than, it's an inverted conceit. And of course, this one, which is more subtle, I'm the same as. So remember, this I am the same as is of a group. So it's the group which says, we are better than, we are worse than. So that underlies, as it were, all concepts. You can see this in the present day discussion and demonstrations all around racism. So every tribe, every nation always has strangers. It always has aliens. Always has the other, and there's always special names for those people, and that perception, is enforced at the beginning as a simple perception, but then it grows as a concept. And really, of course, the way to overcome prejudice is, of course, to begin to see the more underlying connection that lies between human beings, and that realizing that culture, color of skin, and all that sort of stuff is, really quite superficial. Okay, so we've got these two things now. we've got the original distortions of perception when we see something, right? So that includes what is impermanent as permanent, what is painful as pleasant, what is not self as a self, and what is really not very pleasant as beautiful. Okay. And then when we're developing this conception, there is this underlying misunderstanding, underlying wrong view. There's an attachment to what I believe, I know, and there's that conceit with the I. So now, having done that, he points out these 4 different relationships that we can have with things. So these things are anything that we're experiencing. So he says there are four types of experiences, and I suppose the easiest one would be, let me see, where am I? Yes, perceive. See, he's got a whole category of things where this perception is wrong. So it's to perceive earth as earth, to believe I am the body, shall we say, to perceive earth as earth is to see the body as body, but then there's this relationship. He perceives earth as himself, so that's the identity. He perceives himself in earth, so there's me, but I'm in the body. It's 2 separate things, but I'm in the body. There's me as separate from the body, you know, like although the body's there, I'm sort of outside it. And there's me as mine. There's the body as mine, which is that possessiveness. And because of this, the person delights in earth, delights in the body. Okay, so with that basis, one is always seeking happiness, and that's the process of attachment. So you can see that these delusions go deep. So he says this for the 4 elements, and then he talks about beings, right? Conceives himself in beings, part of beings, and he conceives himself as being separate from beings, as being within the community of beings, and he delights and he owns them. He says these are I belong to these beings, and he delights in being a being. So, and then he goes through a whole section of different types of gods, different types of heavenly gods, and then he goes through the 4 arupa jhana, the 4 formless jhanic states, the 4 highest jhanic states, and then he goes through the senses. So what he perceives the seen as seen. So whatever object we see, we perceive it. That's the first word. We've just talked about the orange, yeah? and the heard, and then he goes on about the sensed, which includes the smelt, the tasted, and the touched. And then there's the cognized, so what is known, and he conceives himself in what is known. So that's more to do with knowledge. So this whole discourse is really about the perceptual, conceptual process that we have. When it comes to dukkha, it's all about the heart, the emotion, the attachments. But here you can see these things are based on the way that we look at things, on the way that we relate to things. And there's 2 here which talk about unity, where he's talking about the mind in a state of concentration, but it's seemingly it has an effect on our philosophy, where we think everything is based on one particular concept. So, for instance, a monistic religion believing in one God, that underrules everything. And then there's one with diversity, which is the ordinary mind, which leads us to believe that there are more than one thing which subsist underneath our lives and the universe. So it produces different types of philosophies. Monism and pluralism. It goes as far as that, you see. And then there's the perceives all as all, within the all and separate from the all, and I belong to the all, or the all belongs to me. All these relationships about the way we relate to everything that we experience, and that seemingly leads us to pantheism, that everything is God, and a more sort of romantic idea of being the all, being part of the all. And then finally there's Nirvana, but this Nirvana that he's talking about is the mistaken Nirvanas, thinking that sensual pleasure is Nirvana, all these beautiful mental states caused by absorptions are Nirvana. And so it goes even to that level. Okay, so this is that's the discourse in, shall we say, in a very brief way. And for those who who want to take it deeper, Bhikkhu Bodhi has written a book on it, The Discourse on the Root of Existence. I've read it years ago, and I put it on my list of books to read again, probably next life. So if we go through that again, if you can sort of handle these different lists. So the first list is the way we perceive. Impermanent, we see what is actually impermanent as permanent, right? So that's that sense of continuing, sense of continuation, especially the sense of self. What is painful as pleasant, so that's the indulgence business. We don't see the consequences. Sometimes, and the not self as self, so this feeling that I am me, this sense of self that we have in us, something that is always continuous, a sense of presence, which is of course mind-made, and of course seeing what is translated as foul, or something that is not beautiful, but we see it as beautiful. So this would be something like the human body, which, as I say, you take the skin off, it's not very nice at all. So those are your 4 perversions of perception, right? So they're always there, you see. It's only when you reach these paths and fruits, these attainments, that these are beginning to be undermined. And of course, they've all gone once we've attained full liberation. So there's a whole conceptual cleansing as well. So remember, there's this twofold things. There's the heart being cleansed of its angers and excitements and indulgences, but there's also the mind. The way we think has to be also corrected. And then when we conceive something, when we have a conception, it's always involved with some sort of wrong understanding somewhere, some attachment to it. So there's the heart's involvement, and of course the sense of conceit, better than, more clear than, etc., etc. And then finally, when we come to the actual object that we are relating to, and of course this includes persons when we're including persons, but really it's to do with, in terms of our spiritual awakening, it's to do with ourselves, a sense of identity. See, I am me, a sense of locality, I am in me, I and the me are separate, but I'm in it, a sense of distance, that I'm in it, but I'm not the same at all, and the sense of that I have. So, you know, like when we say I've got a bad knee or something. So those are your 4 relationships. So you can see it's multi-layered, you know, the way that we build up the world around us. And once this we've got these concepts, then you have this proliferation, this papancha. All right, and that's where the mind creates these wonderful stories. At best, we have art and philosophy and maths, maybe. So all these layers, one on top of the other, and it produces our philosophies. So as I say, if you want to go into this more deeply, then Bhikkhu Bodhi has written the book on it. But what I shall do is return to this tomorrow and just give the finishing paragraphs to it, where the Buddha talks about the different types of arahats and himself. So that's quite a discourse. It is the hardest one in the book, because Bodhi actually advises you not to read this one and to go on to the second one and keep going, and then just come back to it at some time when we've collected some of these concepts. So we have done this stuff before, but here it's all coming together to show us how we build up our concept of the world, which of, you know, our relationship. It's all about relationship, remember. It's all about the way we relate both to ourselves and to others. Ethics. Very good. So I can only hope that hasn't created even more confusion, but has been inspirational, and that it will force you to continue your practice until you are liberated sooner rather than later. So we can do some practice.